welcome back to London Climate Action Week here in the heart of the UK's capital city of London. We are a stone's throw from the House of Commons on the South Bank here at County Hall, and we are in the offices of Sustainable Ventures. And thank you very much to Sustainable Ventures for being our hosts, and we're happy to be your guest. We're going to talk a bit about Santa Marta in Colombia, where a very important event happened in terms of a kind of renewed or refreshed or, well, even exciting climate diplomacy, with just under 60 countries in the world coming to this city in Colombia, hosted by the Netherlands and the government of Colombia, to talk about exiting from fossil fuels. And hoping, I think, over time that this coalition of the willing, I was told by the Dutch minister yesterday when I interviewed her, it's the coalition of the doing. So that's quite exciting too. There were a lot of issues on the table in Santa Marta in terms of getting off fossil fuels, and financing was obviously an absolutely key one. And we've got some guests here, some of them whom were in Santa Marta, and also to talk about this issue of finance. How do we finance the exit, and what did Santa Marta maybe deliver on the table, which can be built upon as we go forward to the next climate conference in Turkey, and also the meeting next year of the Transition Away from Fossil Fuel Conference in Tuvalu. Have I got that right? Yes, I nearly said Vanuatu, which would have been a disgrace. Okay, some great guests here. Mariana Paoli. Is that okay? Yes. Not bad. All right. She's Global Policy and Advocacy Climate Lead at Oxfam International. Great to see you again. We've got Nick Robbins, Senior Director, Finance and Private Sector, World Resources Institute. Ralph Shami, who is CEO and co-founder of the Blue Green Future. And last but not least, Natasha Green, Country Lead. I've got you as Australia E3G, which is a global think tank, isn't it?
Yes, that's
But
correct.
I know there's many other things that you're involved in too, but that's great to have you here, particularly with Australia being the host with Turkey of the next climate conference in later this year. Let me go to Marina first. I mean, you were in Santa Marta at the Transition Away from Fossil Fuel Conference. What do you think were the main outcomes regarding climate finance, and what might it mean for the just transition?
I'm happy you mentioned that the Dutch said it would be a coalition of the doing,
yeah,
because this is what we need moving next. The way we're going to judge success is actually based on how much rich countries will move away from fossil fuels first and fast, and what is that finance that must be provided for poor countries to move away in a just manner. And this is still to be seen, still to be put on the table. We saw the report that was launched earlier in the London Climate Week from the conference, which can give us a good pointers, because one of the core pillars is addressing economic dependencies, is the fact that many of the poor countries are in debt and they have to use the revenue of the fossil fuels extraction to pay their debts. So we need to address that dependency. For example, IMF conditionalities to sometimes that encourage those countries to extract fossil fuels must end. They have to have a better access to capital. Addressing cost of capital is absolutely essential. And we need a reform in the global debt system. Through the adoption, like a UN debt convention, to address all the issues they're going through. Fiscal space in the global south. It was also in the report was mentioned how much developing countries are losing due to tax avoidance, tax evasions, illicit financial flows. Mm-hmm. Again, there is a UN tax convention being negotiated at the moment, which could strengthen them and also enable rich polluters to be taxed. So recognizing that the fiscal space in the global south is essential for a just transition to happen, not just for the just transition, but actually finance is essential for all areas of climate action, including what needs to be done under the UNFCCC, has to be one of the drivers. Of course, the Santa Marta was the beginning of the process, and one of the pillars, that dependency is recognized. But without the finance, no transition will happen, and no transition will happen in a just manner. And the public finance element is the core one we have to look at moving forward. So in the preparations for the next conference in Tuvalu, there'll be lots of works on the making. It's important that countries send the signal and take the action to strengthen this other UN process addressing the debt, the tax, and provide the public finance to enable climate action for these developing countries.
Okay, so stay with us. We'll come back on that. I mean, I just wanted to add that you did do a poll, didn't you, just before the conference in Santa Marta that found that 68% of citizens supported increasing taxes on the profits of large fossil fuel companies to help fund the transition. And we can come back and maybe ask why that isn't going further. I think we can probably guess, but we'll come back on that in a moment. Nick Robbins, you co-led the work stream on central banking, and that was a very interesting part of the conference indeed. What can the central banks do? What's your takeaway from the overall conference, and what is the role of central banks in financing a just transition?
Well, I think I'll build on what Mariana was saying. So,
Nick, keep that microphone close to your mouth.
I will build on what Mariana has been saying.
Yep.
So what I think made Santa Marta special, it originated in the climate talks. And it would have always been an interesting meeting. It became a very significant meeting because it was the first intergovernmental meeting following the US and Israeli attack on Iran and the fossil fuel crisis that we saw as a result of that. And I think it was this dimension of the long-term problems of climate change, of course, which we're seeing manifested in loss and damage right now, with this short-term shock. So most countries in the world are fossil fuel importers. Most developing countries are not fossil fuel producers, they're fossil fuel importers. And so actually this is a major issue about making sure that the finance for these countries to transition away. So many Pacific countries, 95% of electricity is from diesel generation. It's crazy, it's crazy. So as we're thinking about this shock, this fossil shock, the institutions in every country that is responsible for this are central banks. Yeah, they're responsible for inflation. This is a big inflation shock. It's hitting low-income communities, businesses, small businesses, the hardest. And so we gathered about 8 central banks, former central bankers, existing central bankers, China, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Spain, ECB, and so on, to really think about how fossil fuel dependence and getting away from fossil fuels fits as part of their monetary policy and their prudential policy objectives. And it was a very powerful debate, and we're very pleased to see that the result of that is recognized in the report, which is released here by the Dutch and the Colombians. And so we've set up what's called the Santa Marta Transition and Financial Stability Group, brings together researchers and central banks to really think, what is the next phase of sustainable central banking? So how do we ensure, as central banks have to rein in what's called fossilflation caused by the second fossil war we're seeing now, that we don't have an unthinking increase in interest rates, which is obviously going to constrain our ability to invest in clean energy, which is now, we know, the most stability enhancing investment you can make. So we're entering a new phase of central banking. And what was very important about this is that there is a strong role on price, a strong role on prudential, making sure that the financial system has integrity, but particularly in developing countries, a strong role around financial inclusion. And central banks in developing countries have a financial inclusion role, which is crucial to the just transition, allowing access to finance for households, for small businesses, and so on. So we're now continuing that work. We'll have a whole series of meetings and research leading up to the next conference. But it really is a sort of new dimension to this transition away from fossil fuels. In fact, we have central bankers, European Central Bank board member Frank Alderson, recognizing that fossil fuel dependence is a threat to Europe's price stability.
Yeah. That was an amazing announcement or comment by him, which was, I think, unprecedented from the ECB.
And that will be the same for the central banker in Fiji, or the central banker in many developing countries as well. So I think this is a new way in which we can encourage the transition. Amongst, I think in most countries, the most sort of stable institution of government.
Yeah. I have to tell you that I bumped into an old friend of mine the other day who is ex-BBC correspondent, and he said that the fossil fuel industry always told us that renewables were intermittent and not always available. Now we've learned the same goes for fossil fuels, right? In fact, more so, very intermittent and totally unavailable for quite large periods, which was a good point. Ralph, you worked at the International Monetary Fund for many years. A lot of relevance in this issue of climate finance. There are calls for reform of the International Monetary Fund and other big financial institutions. What do you see in terms of your work, the global financial institutions in terms of climate finance? Can they play a better role than maybe they have in the past? Is there a sunny future for the big financial institutions like the IMF? Yes or no? I mean, what do they do from here?
Yes. The answer is, of course, yes. I look at this as an opportunity for the Bretton Woods institutions to reform themselves. Because what they were set up to do in 45 is not what we need them to do in our day and age or for the future. For example, just to go back to what my colleague was saying here, I'm an IMF mission chief. I was an IMF mission chief. I spent 25 years at the IMF. And I know all about debt sustainability issues and fiscal space and all this stuff. But when we gave advice on debt sustainability for countries, we never really looked at how that advice impacts, for example, the natural space. For example, the natural capital in that country.
Forests and things like that.
Absolutely, because really, if you allow me to take one step back, the real issue around this is that the way we measure GDP. Anything you can kill or extract enters the GDP. So anything you can kill acquires a price, right? Grab a fish, swimming, as Sylvia Earle would say, frolicking freely in the ocean, suffocate her, put her on a plate, it acquires $30 a plate or $50 a plate. Look at a beautiful tree. Ask anybody passing, if it's not a fruit tree, what's the value of that tree? They'll say, oh, timber. See? So in death, whatever we can cut, extract, acquires a price. The problem we are facing is what keeps us alive has a zero price. And what keeps us alive is the living nature. So from my own perspective as a professional economist, the issue is how we measure GDP. So when you tell me we need to reform, yes, of course, but where do you want to start? You want to start with the paradigm. The paradigm itself is based on dead and extracted nature. Oil, gas, minerals, food, all of that is extracted and put through the production process. So what's missing is the living nature is missing. So when you want to reform, that means it does, and then you have to ask yourself the question, does living nature have a value? And the answer is, of course it is. Seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves, living trees are the ones who absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Forests are responsible for the rains. You see? So all of this, if you have coral reefs, they're nurseries for fish, they provide tourism, they stave off flooding, living mangroves. So that part.
Yeah, this is very important. And I'm just wondering, there have been attempts to reform this kind of...
Not really. There have been calls for attempts. But if you want to reform it, what you really want to tell the IMF is that your debt sustainability, let me be sort of more practical, your debt sustainability analysis is divorced from ecological integrity. So when we give advice to a country, we say, for example, take Maldives. Maldives' debt to GDP is 120%. It's too high. So the advice would be, you need to reduce your debt. Well, how am I going to reduce my debt? Typical advice would be exactly what we're saying. You need to cut your expenditure on people, and you need to expand the revenue. Well, how am I going to expand the revenue? You can't attract more tourists, and being an offshore center is really a dying proposition. Do you have something that you can extract? You see? Do you have something do you have trees? Cut them down, sell them as timber. Why don't you allow for gas and oil extraction? Why don't you allow for mineral extraction? So the advice on how to deal with the debt is devoid from the ecological side. And that's the problem. What we need to do is bring the two together, say there's no debt sustainability without ecological integrity. And the way to do that is to prove to people like me in the finance world, central banks and others, that the living nature has value, not only intrinsic value.
Okay.
Like all life is precious,
Yep.
that it has value. Take the seagrass of Bahamas. Seagrass of Bahamas captures so much carbon, it can, if they were to sell that carbon, they would acquire $12 billion just in protecting their seagrass. Mm-hmm. The corals of Maldives produce 2 billion out of 7 billion their GDP, but that's a living coral. That's a living seagrass. So nature has value. The problem is it's not in the GDP.
Yeah, GDP is a very crude measurement, isn't it?
Of that thing.
Yeah. It's about making things, and in the case of this, chopping down trees,
Exactly.
you get a lot for the logs, but you've got no river systems left. How are you going to survive? Yeah. Let's come back to this in a second. Let me introduce Natasha, or I've already introduced Natasha, but bring her in. So Australia, together with Turkey, will host the next COP31. Can't believe it's COP31, can you? It's just, I mean, it's like counting up to 10, but it's gone wild, COP31. The presidency announced this 35 by 35 roadmap, and I can see you've got a little badge saying electricity now. So this is 35% electrification by 2035. Where's the money going to come from for this?
It's a really good question and a very pertinent one. So the announcement, as you said, 35 by 35 was announced at Bonn, but actually yesterday during London Climate Action Week at the Global Energy Transition and Electrification Summit, the Electrify Now campaign was launched. And as part of the Electrify Now campaign, we've got a government coalition, including the UK, EU, Australia, Turkey, and Ethiopia as well for the COP32 presidency next year, as well as over 40 organisations and alliances who have come together to sort of galvanise support for increasing and accelerating faster electrification, with the aim of increasing electricity share of final energy consumption from 21% now to 35% by 2035. How that will be financed is an incredibly critical question that we need to really draw attention to at the moment. And I think one thing we haven't touched on is actually donor finance, overseas development aid, is shrinking at the moment. It's an incredibly challenging area. We're seeing drawbacks kind of across the board. But the unique thing about electrification is, one, it enables transitioning away from fossil fuels. And two, electrification is not just a climate issue. It's one, it supports energy security, it creates kind of cost competitiveness, it's an affordability strategy, it enables energy access. And therefore that transitions or, turns the attention from just a climate finance issue to actually, one that's much more focused on development and economic development. And I think that's, really critical, because what we can do through this is look at different mechanisms to support increased finance towards electrification. Actually, over about 90% of global electrification will be financed through the private sector. So, I mean, how do we enable this through the COP, and indeed through other sort of, multilateral moments and institutions as well? I think the first thing is looking at MDBs, as we've already touched on. Thinking about, is there a target that MDBs could develop alongside
Multilateral Development Bank.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
Speaking in acronyms, the fall of us all. Multilateral development banks coming up with a target to accompany the 35% by 2035, looking at the existing architecture that already exists through the COPs. So how do we mobilise country platforms which really connect the sort of transitioning away from fossil fuel roadmaps with electrification, to look at how countries will lead themselves and therefore generate that local investment to support electrification. Things like aggregation platforms. I think one of the issues with sort of scaling up electrification is the demand that then puts on the grid. And for a lot of developing countries, where you've got sort of small communities who are not necessarily connected to the grid, you're then looking at small micro projects which aren't particularly attractive to large investors, particularly the private sector. So, could we look at an aggregation platform where we bring together multiple small projects to then create something like 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig worth of projects, that then becomes a more attractive financial investment for the sort of financial architecture that exists. And finally, something that we haven't really connected yet, I think, in the sort of climate sphere is the growth of AI. And actually, London Climate Action Week, so E3G founded London Climate Action Week, and we're really excited this week that there are a number of events focused on AI. And AI has a role to play here. And I wonder if we can collectively sort of put our heads together to think about how AI centres can actually fund infrastructure for electrification, because the two are going to be deeply connected, as both sort of technologies develop. So I think there are sort of multiple tools that we can use here, one based on sort of the existing architecture we're working with, and two, thinking about sort of innovative solutions and how we think outside the box.
Let's hold that one there, because that's very interesting. I mean, we've got like 8 minutes left. I don't know how we're going to wrap this one up, right? And thread all these different needles here in this tapestry of wonderful ideas and commentary. But I mean, I suppose it might be as simple as saying that obviously finance is critical. We know it's going to be talked about. It's going to be a focus of the COP, of course, as always. What does Santa Marta need to do, the process need to do? Is there need to be some win-win-wins here, right? Some quick wins if this whole idea of exiting fossil fuels, a coalition of doing, actually is going to succeed? And where can we find quick wins in the finance? Your argument would be this is a moment for the IMFs and others to start pricing in the wider economy and the value of it, yes?
So let me
Let's go around. Each one of you has to answer this question.
Currently, the discussion, and I've been in many of those discussions, everybody presents you climate and nature as risks. I look at them as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Nature is a new asset. Living nature is a new asset. If you present living nature as a new asset class to the finance world, they'll pile in. But if we can keep talking about risks, right? But seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves are a new asset class. We never thought of them that way. We always thought of them as nature. Now, if you can make that argument convincingly to the finance world, you would unleash the trillions, because nature needs, after you account for philanthropy and government, you need $1 trillion a year to protect and save it. Where's it going to come from?
Right.
Only from the private sector. How do you bring the private sector? Not by proselytizing to them. It's not going to work. You have to say there is something for you in the protection and restoration of nature. You can put rules down, you can put regulations, but ultimately they have to see, what do I get out of it? So does living nature have value? Yes or no?
I buy this, and I also buy the fact that we all know there's some positivity going on in this field. It's how you scale it up in a way that works for the developing countries with lots of living nature. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, the UK is an impoverished, biodiversity poor, there's not much nature here to really, but in some parts of the world, it really is the capital of the people, right? And how do you actually, I hate the word monetize because I know it's got lots of connotations, but how do you ensure that they receive good volumes of finance for what they're actually protecting?
You bake it into the system.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's one thing to say we need finance, we need to bring the private sector, but you bring the finance sector with rules.
Right.
So
Nick's nodding over there.
Yeah.
So you got somebody on your side on that side. So that's good news. I'm on your side as well. I'm just trying to. Yes. Where do we get some quick wins on this in terms of finance?
We have to look at the quality of the finance. There are limits to private finance. Not all projects are bankable, and a number of public problems can't find private solutions. So public finance play a big role. And a quick win would really, as you said, most of the population are in favor of taxing the profits of fossil fuel companies. And so governments don't need to wait for international action. They can start implementing taxation at the national level now. They can implement windfall taxes. They can tax also the jets, or are ways to really increase.
Why are they not doing this more? I mean, because everybody's appalled about the profits they've been making recently, off the back of all kinds of questionable activities. Why the government's not? I mean, they've even been subsidising them more than than ever before, the fossil fuel industry. So, I mean, they're going the wrong way, aren't they? Why are they not biting the bullet on this, the nations? Are they terrified of the fossil fuel companies?
That's a really good question. Yes, fossil fuel subsidies must end. This taxation must come into place. And as I said, it depends on a national action. So if they really want to show the leadership, to show the finance and the commitment they put in Santa Marta, they should be implementing those now.
Right.
If they want to provide that finance for other areas of climate or loss and damage or adaptation that we need for COP31 and beyond, we need that public finance. It's not all any kind of taxation. It's specific on profits of those fossil fuel companies that are really reaching billions and billions.
Yeah. Okay, right. There's one.
So
two quick wins so far.
Three ideas. So Mariana mentioned cost of capital. The biggest issue is going to be about the rollout, particularly of grids, is they're very expensive, cost of capital. Central banks are very influential in terms of interest rates. And I think one of the things which really caused a stir in Santa Marta was when we had Dr. Ma Jun, former chief economist of the Central Bank of China, describing how in China, if you're a developer of transition-relevant projects like grids, whatever, you can have a refinancing window in China of 1.5%. Or 1.25%. It's just come down to. So it's a bargain, and developers will go through the process of all the developments and so on. So is there a role the Santa Marta group of countries can really focus on? Can we learn from China and also Japan, which have different ways of having specific and preferential interest rates for transition, for TAF relevant, transition away from fossil relevant projects? So that's the first one. Here in London, we are gathering with Triodos Bank, a Dutch bank, leading Dutch bank.
Yeah, excellent. Part of the Global Alliance Banking on Values.
Banking on Values, exactly right. So we're gathering with Colombia and the Netherlands and also other states, some of the private sector. So we talked about the importance of public finance. But we do need to have investors and banks and DFIs there to say, what is their role? Because they were missing in Santa Marta. The next meeting, they've got to be there and they've got to take leadership about how they're going to provide finance to meet the goal. And then the third idea is something I've been thinking about here in London, because we have bringing together lots of very smart people thinking about climate finance and climate strategy at the moment of a climate crisis in the UK, because we have a heat. So my suggestion is that we introduce countries can introduce a heat fall tax. So every time that the temperature rises above a certain level, I would say 30 degrees Celsius, in the UK, you have an automatic tax on the shareholdings and bond holdings of investors in fossil fuel companies. Because having been an investor, fossil fuel companies are set up primarily to benefit shareholders. So we need to internalize that externality and give an incentive for people to move away, reallocate their portfolios. And that would provide a fund which 50% could be invested internally for transition away from fossil fuels and also
adaptation,
and 50%
is
concessional finance, including solidarity level. So that's my heat fall tax.
I like the idea.
It's invented here in London, and I hope that Oxfam could support it, as well as E3G and our friend over there.
Oh, and over to you, Lassie. Yeah.
It's so hard to sort of sum it up into a couple of wins. I think really focusing on country-led transitions, and that's through a combination of existing architectures using mechanisms like the country platforms to bring in sort of local investment, really think about what is going to work for this specific country. I think it's looking at the existing architecture that already exists across the multilateral ecosystem. We didn't touch on things like the Global Clean Power Alliance finance mission and how that's able to sort of bring together countries, multilateral development banks, export credit agencies to really look at innovative new ways to crowd and provide greater sources of finance, particularly for emerging and developing economies. And then I think also looking outside the box as to how do we crowd in private capital? How do we source it? As you said, things like grids, things like electrification are very expensive upfront capital costs. Now that those costs are absolutely reducing, but it is a different way of financing infrastructure, and there's a lot of upfront capital. So how do we source it in the private sector by making projects more bankable, by reducing risk levels, and by thinking about reform through MDBs, bringing together the sort of ecosystem to crowd that private investment where needed in the regions where it will have the most amount of impact. We yesterday at the Global Energy Transition Electrification Summit, we heard from President Whips of Palau, and he was talking about one of his goals for the Pacific Island Forum is for the Pacific to be the first 100% renewables region. And that's because for most Pacific countries, about 10% of their GDP is spent on imported fossil fuels. And so if we're able to support regions like that and then extrapolate those messages to other parts of the world to sort of transition infrastructure, which then has knock-on effects to creating greater energy security, energy sovereignty, energy access, there are so many development gains that can be created from that move from transitioning away to fossil fuels into cleaner futures.
Right, I've got people giving me dirty looks here right now because we're running over time, and there's like a whole afternoon of back-to-back shows. We will send this recording, which will be out tomorrow, but we'll send it to the Dutch and the Colombians so they can see what you said, something they can watch down whilst they're having their egg on toast in the morning or something like that. And but no, I mean, good on the nature side, good on taxing the profits, good on some sort of heat windfall tax, which sounds on the shareholders or whatever, so they bear the burden of that, and that'll make them change their minds quickly. And obviously key grids, I mean, that's absolutely good. And also investment packages for mini grids that you can put together so you've got something that attracts investors but actually helps people in smaller communities. I mean, it's endless, but these are quick wins for the Santa Marta initiative or process, whatever we're going to call it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have another wonderful guest with us here at London Climate Action Week 2026 in the heart of London. We're here with Sustainable Ventures. They have given us their part of their home, so we can actually do our studio here. So thank you very much indeed for that. Let me turn to Elizabeth Sturken or Sturken?
Sturken.
Sturken, it's Sturken, isn't it? Exactly. Who's the Vice President, Net Zero Ambition and Action at the Environmental Defence Fund in the United States of America. So welcome to We Don't Have Time TV.
I'm thrilled to be here, Nick, on this record-breaking heat in Europe. It's like Mother Nature's reminding us we need to act on climate now.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Exactly. I think that's absolutely true. And I think we can ask the people of London right now, and I think we're going to see this heat wave shifting towards Germany. My girlfriend lives in Germany. I live in Berlin. She's ready for the weekend where they're looking at 40, 41, so centigrade temperatures. It's really quite shocking. We know governments are really important in the story of climate action and stepped up climate action. But we also know there are other sectors of the economy that are absolutely, or other sectors of society that are really important. And we're going to talk a bit about the private sector and supply chains. Elizabeth, you're an expert in this. And you also work specifically with something called EDF Plus Business, Environmental Defence Fund Plus Business, which engages with the private sector. Firstly, just for those that don't know, what is the Environmental Defence Fund?
So EDF is one of the world's largest environmental groups, and we bring our unique expertise, science, markets, business expertise, to unlikely partners to try and drive action on climate now to benefit people on the planet, really addressing and incentivizing action on the most urgent issues.
So you're working specifically on something called EDF Plus Business, which sounds very intriguing. Can you tell the viewers about what that is?
Yes, well, the private sector is really critical for climate action. Governments can only do so much, as we can see in the United States right now. Supply chains are producing 50% of emissions, and so getting companies to act is really important. And there's a few ways to do that. The first is demand signals from companies. They're some of the most powerful levers. They can drive the change directly through their supply chains. So how do we cut emissions? We think about it this way, Nick. Think about a Venn diagram where you have emissions and you have leverage. Where is the business case strongest and where can business influence the most? Zeroing in there is where we need to act.
Very interesting. And I mean, these are complex, these supply chains are complex things, right? They whip all around the world, but they're also themselves vulnerable to climate change. So there's a kind of win-win with this if we can actually deal with climate change through business and supply chains. I mean, what would you describe as the level of enthusiasm and commitment to climate in the private sector at the moment? I mean, whether through supply chains or through domestically their own actions, is the private sector still on board with this topic?
Well, you might have heard a lot about green hushing, where companies are not speaking about what they're doing, but the data show they are still acting. Why are they doing that? Because it's good for business. And, you know, renewable energy, I think, is a great example. I mean, there you had private sector, public sector, global investment. The private sector catalyzed investment, innovation, drove demand, reduced the cost of production, and really renewables are now cheaper, right, than fossil fuels. So I think that what we're seeing with companies is that they are continuing the sustainability work, but speaking about it less. The challenge really now is, how do we go faster? How do we scale? And what does that look like? The good news is there's been some recent standards on the voluntary side that are going to help clarify how to act for business. The ISO Net Zero Standard, the Science Based Targets Initiative Net Zero Standard, and those they're showing that companies are still acting. Over 13,000 companies have set a net zero target. And for the first time, those standards, I think, will clarify things and make acting make it clear what companies need to do. And I guess the one other thing I would point out is a piece of work that EDF just put out, EDF Plus Business, my team and I, that I think represents the best thinking, if I may say so, on what companies need to do now. It's years of trying to figure out, how do we act, what makes sense, and really it's about baking it in the business, driving it deep, having the business own it. Companies are not going to do this, right? We're not going to decarbonize unless this makes sense. And from a business perspective, that is really what will drive the whole scale change that we need, the decarbonization at scale.
And the studies you've been doing, are these predominantly United States of America companies, or does it stretch beyond that to Europe? Or
well, the truth is that if it were only United States, you know, it would be an interesting case study. We're seeing some of the quietest yet strongest action actually in the United States. But the truth is, many companies are global. You have EU and its regulations, and that is pulling demand for products that have lower climate impact. For example, the EU methane regulations, right? Really important. So those policy demand signals help. The cost savings, the return on investment, all of those things are really quietly driving a lot of action. It's not enough. We need to scale. And that's where companies need to lean in, right? Leverage their supply chains, ask their companies to decarbonize along with them.
Absolutely. And I mean, these global companies are potentially so important because their footprints in, say, Asia or Africa or Latin America, etc., where maybe, you know, things are a little bit maybe behind in large numbers of cases than that's happening in the United States or Europe, but they want to be a part of this story,
and sometimes they're leapfrogging, right? The
well,
innovation is leapfrogging, right?
That's
and
true.
They're seeing the value of market mechanisms and high integrity carbon credits, and
Yeah.
really investing in nature. So it's
Yes, you're absolutely right.
interesting.
It's not. There are examples in the developing world that
Yes.
they're doing actually better than the developed world. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. And but I mean, the big global corporations. I mean, if they, it seems inconsistent sometimes that they would do, say, so much renewable energy in the United States,
Yes.
but less in another place where, in fact, it could be even cheaper to install it. It's just that the policies aren't quite as strongly
right.
in favor of it.
Yes.
And so I think some companies do actually go above and beyond the government policy because they want to be ahead of the game as well. So it's a very interesting and curious landscape, and very important in terms of understanding how the private sector operates and thinks. And seeing those front runners is cool because they're the ones that can also lift the other ones up. Yeah.
And those front runners have supply chains across the globe.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
can work with those partners, engage with developing countries to try and drive the policies and
Yeah.
do the hard work on the ground to get things moving. So they have the capital, they have the goals, and to meet those goals, they're going to have to do that.
Yeah. So we were mentioning before on the previous show about this Santa Marta conference in Colombia, which was hosted by the Netherlands and the Colombian government. Two very formidable women from the Netherlands and Colombia, environment ministers, and they're actually here at London Climate Action Week as well. I bumped into them last night and had a chat with them, and they produced a report about what happened in Santa Marta, which was all about kickstarting, in this case, just under 60 countries who want to exit from fossil fuels, countries like the UK, Germany, through to the small islands in the Pacific, through to Angola, Nigeria, you name it, Uruguay. It was really a very positive atmosphere. And one thing that also came up in these Santa Marta discussions just over a month ago was the issue of the super pollutants and the issue of methane, which you just mentioned before. And they see that group of nations, and I think there are more going to be joining them as the coalition of the doing, as they like to call it, to exit from fossil fuels. They will be also looking at these quick wins that they need to make. And they see quick wins in different places, but also in the super pollutants and methane. This would seem to be a sensible decision if you need quick wins on climate action. And so tell us why, Elizabeth. Why is methane so cool in terms of quick action?
Well, I would say, Nick, if you want to do two things that will have the most impact on making our trajectory to net zero smoother and getting us to a stable climate the fastest, it's number one, acting on short-lived climate pollutants like methane, and number two, stopping deforestation. So methane, the science around that shows it's just a super powerful climate gas, right? And if we reduce it, it becomes like an emergency brake on stopping climate change and getting us to a more stable climate. And what we're finding also is it's one of the most underfunded opportunities for investment. And so because of that, because of the quick win, it's not going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it is really the opportunity that we all need to be leaning in on right now.
And EDF has done a lot of work on this, haven't you?
That's right.
And
yes.
You've been behind satellites as well, spotting methane plumes coming from different parts of the world. So great work that EDF has been doing. And it's interesting to note that one of my colleagues right now is actually heading or is already at a reception hosted by King Charles III, which specifically on the card says to a non-CO2 pollutant methane event, right? I mean, that's got to be so cool that the king is actually
I love that the king is still showing up for environmental events and leaning in, right? And leaning in on one of the most important issues. Yes, EDF has been focusing on oil and gas emissions from methane emissions from oil and gas and also from agriculture. These are two areas that we feel like can really make a big difference. On the private sector side, we are part of something called the Beyond Alliance, and we're doing a few things. We are helping to launch the Super Pollutant Action Initiative, which is a corporate coalition of a number of companies like Google, Amazon, Chase, Salesforce, working together through procurement, capital, and partnerships to really use carbon credits and to enable high impact super pollutant mitigation. So that, along with a super pollutant academy to educate folks about this, and a roadmap to try and figure out what are the highest impact things to do first. It's really about enabling private sector action and getting that funding there faster. So hitting it from all angles. I mentioned the government regulations, corporate action, individual action. It all adds up.
Good. Well, thank you very much